Have you ever wondered how the same program acts in different ways based on the need of the user? How are developers writing a code that it's useful in opposite scenarios? How does a login page knows to let you in or deny your access? How is Netflix showing us totally different titles based on location, based on our preferences, so on and so forth? At the end of the day, exactly as you probably imagine, it's one program that acts in different ways based on variables. If you don't know what variables are, please take a look at our video about variables. It's down below in the description, and come back after that. So let's take a look today on how to build a flow that interacts with the needs of the user. Programs follow different paths for different needs with the help of decisional points. In UiPath, we have two different types of activity for decisions based on different scenarios. If we need to choose between many options possible, then most probably we will go with a switch activity. For example, if we need to run a program that acts in a different way for each day of the week, then most probably we will choose a switch activity to do exactly that. However, if we are going to choose only between two options, then most probably we are going to use an if type of activity. As an example, if we need to run a program in a different way for odds or even days of the month, then for sure we are going to use an if activity. In UiPath, there are two different types of if activities, and those work exactly the same, but the purpose of them is to serve two different type of blocks: a flowchart if activity and also a sequence if activity. If flowchart and sequence are terms that don't tell you much, that's absolutely normal. Those are terms very specific for UiPath and define the blocks that you will see in a bit on the screen. So, to recap, we have switch activities and if activities. And the if activities are actually splitted in if activities for flowcharts and if activities for sequences. How about jumping directly in UiPath and taking a look at how those things are useful, how do we build them, and what we need to do with them? Okay, perfect. So now we are in UiPath. Let's take a look at what we need to build today. Let's take a look first at the if statements. As I've told you initially, there are two types of if statements. There are some that work directly in the flowchart, like a flow decision, and there are some that work in a sequence. So why don't start with that? We have the if sequence, if example sequence. Let's start here. So I will just take an if action and add it to this sequence. First of all, the if block contains some very important parts. It's the condition. What does the if block checks in order to make sure that the decision that to understand what's the decision that it needs to follow. Here we have what happens if the condition is met and what happens if the condition is not met. In order to test the block, I will create a variable. Let's use number variable. The type should be integer. If you are not familiar with those examples, those variables, please feel free to take a look in the description. We have a video explaining exactly that. I will enlarge the scope since we are going to use it for the other if as well. So let's say if number it's greater than 0, then we have something that we want it to happen. Otherwise, we have another action. So let's use a message box to simulate what we are trying to do. A message box for one situation and a different one for another. So let's assume that the number is greater than, then we are going to present the message number higher than 0. And if the condition is not met, then we want to notify the user that the number they have chosen is less or lower than 0. Perfect. So now we have everything that we need. We just need to set up variable
value. So let's start with a number that's lower than 0 to test the situation. So we have a -2 as a default value. We need to set the block to start. Perfect. So let's see what's happening. The start of the process will check first the condition. The number variable that we've loaded now with -2 will be checked if it's higher than 0. And one of those two paths will be decided based on the value of the variable. So now we expect it to be lower than 0. This means that the message box that we need to see will be the one that's here in the block. Whatever activity is found here in this block, it will run. So let's start to see what's happening. In a bit, we will see the message. Okay, so now we have the confirmation that the flow went through the else section and notified us that the number is lower than 0. So in a nutshell, this is the if function, and this is how this works. But as I've told you initially, there are two different types of ifs. We also have one that works in sequences and one that works in flowcharts. So for flowcharts, we have the flow decision, which is basically exactly the same block, contains the two options. True stands for if, true stands for then, and the false stands for else. Perfect. So let's use the same example. Message box for higher than 0. And a different message box for lower than 0. Okay, so now if it's false, I wanna check that. Or actually, let's first define the condition. So our condition is that number, we're using the same variable, it's greater than 0. Perfect. So now we know that if the number is greater than 0, then we are going to use the true branch and show that the number is greater than 0. And if it's not, then we will show the false branch. So now let's define the number as being 2 and play. We are expecting to see the message box. So that shows us that the number is greater than 0. Perfect. If we are now using a number that's lower than 0, the other branch of the flow decision should be chosen, and we will see that the number that we have chosen is lower than 0. So pretty straightforward. Those are the two options that we have for if. I think that it's worth mentioning the fact that the if statements in both scenarios can be used in cascade. So for example, if we want to check something more, if the number is greater than 0, then instead of using a message box, we may want to use another if statement. So I will delete the message box. As you can see, those are nested. So in the then block, we now have another if. Let's check the same variable. If number is also greater than 10, we will present a message to notify the user that your number is also greater than 10. Perfect. And we can also include the message box because this block can contain as many activities as we want, and say that the number is greater than 0. Perfect. So what we're doing now is checking the condition. If the number is greater than 0, then we are again going through an if, in which we have two options to show if it's a number greater than 10, and then let's say your number is less than 10 but greater than 0. And on top of that, we will add a different message box or a different action. It doesn't really matter. So going back to flowchart, making sure that this is the start node. So check the condition. Let's see what happens. Now the number that we have, the variable that we have as number, it's loaded with -50, so it will run through the else condition, notifying that it's lower than 0. But let's load that with 5. Let's see what's happening. So we will run the process. So the number, it's less than 10 but greater than 0. What actually happened? And also the later block that we've added here. Perfect. So pretty clear. Let's take also a look why we should also consider using a flow switch box. What's actually a flow switch and how we can use it? It is, as I've initially described it, it's a way to choose between multiple options, not necessarily only two. So for example, we will create a different variable, will be a string this time, and will be named day. We are going to populate it with the name of the day in the week. Let's load it with Monday as a default. Perfect. So the flow switch now will check the expression, and the expression for us will be whatever the day variable contains. And now let's use also the message box to present a message box. So this will be the Monday message box. Let's create a different one for Tuesday. And in order to have more than two, I will also create one for Friday. Of course, we can create one for each day of the week. So now we just need to connect those. We have the expression checked in the flow switch. So once the process starts, the flow switch will help us to check the expression. The expression is the day of the week. The type of the argument, it's a string. So, whoops. Okay. So we have it. Let's make it much clearer this way. So as soon as the process starts, the bot will check the expression and take a look at what's the text that's inside of the variable called day. And based on the text that's there, we'll need to take a choice. How does it know what message box should the robot choose? Then it's pretty simple. Now you see that we have default case 1 and case 2. Those are actually the values that the robot will check in the expression that we gave. So we have flow switch for Monday, flow switch for Tuesday, flow switch for Friday. Let's add the text. Yay, it is Monday. If it's Tuesday, then we have already Tuesday. And if it's Friday, we have, thanks God, it's Friday. Perfect. So what happens if the day it's Monday? Then we need to decide that the defaults, and also we'll explain a bit the, so as you can see here, we have a default case. Whatever happens, the decision that gets in this flow switch, if it's not any of the cases, will go directly to this branch on Monday. Otherwise, the robot will go on any of those other cases. So this is the default one. We'll call it Monday. The second one should be Tuesday. And the third should be Friday. Perfect. So now we have the day loaded with Monday. We expect that running this robot will trigger the message box that we have on the flow switch on the Monday branch. Let's see if that happens. Perfect. Let's try Friday as well. Perfect, it works. Let's type Friday with a small f. It won't work. Notice just the fact that those checks are very specific and case sensitive. Because of that, the flow didn't went on the Friday branch, but as explained earlier, it went directly to the branch that was a default. So even though we changed the name, this first branch remains the default. And the robot was not able to understand Friday. It wasn't exact match. Because of that, it went on the default branch. Okay, perfect. And now you understand how the robot takes decision and how you can make your automation respond to different scenarios. Thank you very much for watching and talk to you soon. Bye bye.